This is the Acts 2028 podcast,
where two young Church of God pastors
discuss the challenges and victories we face in leading revitalization.
I am TJ Samuelu.
I am Brian Seidel.
I am in an urban context in Seattle, Washington.
I am in a suburban and rural context in Boise, Idaho.
I am in a liberal state.
I am in a conservative state.
My ministry background is in missions.
My ministry background is in youth ministry.
And yet we are both in our first lead roles.
To help God revitalize the existing church in the Pacific Northwest.
We are helping each other.
And you.
To truly live out Acts 2028.
TJ, here we are again, back for another episode. And just as always, it always seems like we're running crazy, and we finally got on to record today. So if you're out there listening, you're a pastor, church leader, no, you're not alone. All right. We're all crazy busy and running through schedules. And this is what we talk, and life always happens. So you just, before we started recording, talking about some of our crazy lives and some of the different things that we deal with. But hey, it's great to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. It's a good opportunity just kind of to calm down a little bit, refocus. And anytime, obviously, you get to gather and talk about God and his work is just kind of, it's better than the chaos that may be ensuing in your life. So he's a rooting factor that helps us cope. As we spoke on Sunday, with hope, with Advent, hope to cope kind of thing. And so I'm glad that we're here. I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to have a show for you today. And just excited for the season. There's still a lot of hope, a lot of things going on as we move into the Christmas season.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, as we are recording this, it is starting the Christmas season. Tomorrow is the first day of December. So we are definitely into that. And, but with that said, whether it's holiday season or not, we know that our world is crazy. And in fact, I think just the other day I was having a conversation with a guy from my church, and he literally said, he's like, yeah, everything is so crazy. He's like, the only thing that's keeping me alive right now, keep moving is my faith. He's like, I can't imagine if I didn't have God in my life, what life would be like or what it'd be feeling right now. And I think we all feel that in some ways, right? I mean, here we are, almost 2 years into this pandemic that some of us thought was going to last a few months. And, and again, now we just hear this news of another variant that's coming out, and all this talk of what's going to come with it. But I think that the point is we don't know, right? I mean, there's so much that we don't know, but we serve a God that does, and a God that's in control. And so no matter how chaotic your life is right now when you're listening to this, just be encouraged, know that there is hope, right? That God's with you, and you're not alone, right? In this world, and because God's always with you no matter what. And even whatever you find through listening to us, right? We're here with you too, and we're in all the craziness with you. So should we actually jump into some real maybe meaningful conversation? I don't know if that's
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of one of the things we talked about a little bit last show was just kind of even governance and stuff. We talked about employees and volunteers and key things like that. We've discussed a lot of things over the course of now being in season 2, but specifically this time we're going to talk more about board governance. How do we make decisions? How do those decisions get made? In fact, one of the things that we were talking about when we got on was I was running around trying to make some of those decisions. In fact, I have right now a pending email because we have kind of a board-led church. So yeah, let's jump in there and let's kind of lead the conversation and see hopefully that this is some help. Obviously, there's not one size fits all to these kinds of circumstances, but I think really understanding maybe how someone arrived there, maybe like apologetics, is also very helpful, because sometimes it just won't apply to your congregation or where you're serving or where you're leading. But if you understand the spirit or the reason as to why those things are, like accountability or checks and balances, those are a lot of the purposes. If you understand that part of it, then maybe you can find something that will be more tailor-made to you, that you can bounce off maybe your accountability people, whether that's board members or whether that's just even like a friend pastor like Brian and I do. So hopefully you have the opportunity to vet that process, that you have people that can speak into that, that you can look at it from different angles and different perspectives. And I think, again, as we look at our faith, uh, these things are meant, if done the right way, to help protect us stewardship wise and keep us above reproach. And so, like, how we navigate those things are so important, because I think probably more than ever, like you talk about with the chaos and stuff that's been ensuing regardless of the season, I think especially where we live in Seattle, we got people just wanting to see the church fail. And so I think us being wise and doing the right thing is always going to be important wherever we're at. But I think specifically where you serve, that might be the biggest witness that you have. And so if you lose that, or things get brought out that, you just weren't aware of, man, that can be so damaging. So hopefully this is an encouragement. I know sometimes it's the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's kind of tough, but I need to process through this. And some people are like, yes, let's do this. So take us away, Brian. Let's jump into this.
Yeah. So when you talk about, again, just kind of structure, leadership structure of our churches, and I think this is one thing that's probably a little bit unique to an established church versus a church plant, right? Because when you come into a church plant, like depending on the model of church planting you're doing, like there's probably certain structures built in, or certain accountabilities from a sponsoring church or a planting organization or whatever it is. But pretty much from a plant, though, you are making it up right as you go, or you're starting it. The unique thing of established church is that you are walking into a structure that's already existing, right? That was there before you. And so first off to say is that it's very important for you to understand what that structure is as you enter into that established church, right? And because like you said, they're all unique. And even though, like you said, there's some kind of typical camps or styles of structures that I'm going to mention here literally really soon, right? When we look at those, there are the kind of those certain styles, but yet there's very variances within each of them. And a lot of times, especially in smaller established churches, sometimes, different policies or governing structures sometimes are put in place because of one person, or to avoid a hard conversation, right? Or again, to find that's something you need to look into as a leader, whether you're the pastor, or even just a board member or a lay leader in your church, in your established church, is find out kind of what's the backstory behind the structure that exists, because there probably is one, right? As to, what's been done, how it's been changed. And again, I talked about in previous episodes, we've already talked about it, about all the backstory at Oregon Trail that kind of led into the structure that we have now today. So here we go. The two most typical, styles of governance that we see in most churches. So most churches fall into one of them. One is either a board-led or an elder-led structure, or a staff-led or pastor-led structure. And so those are kind of the two main camps right now. Both of those have multiple people in different roles, like you said, for accountability, checks and balances. I think, and those are both healthy for just varying reasons. Just like everything has strengths, has also our weaknesses, right? Or weaknesses can be strengths. And so there are plus and minuses to both structures, I will say. But there is kind of this third camp, probably the ones that just don't fit in there. And even in my observation, I've seen there are a lot of kind of church plants that might default to that. And that is just, there is no structure. We don't have a board. We don't have anything. It's just kind of, I'm just doing whatever I'm doing, right? And with the pastor. And so, and just like you said, though, that is a very dangerous place to be. And I think no matter what environment you're in, whether you're in a place like Seattle, like you said, there's people that want to see the church fail, or even like in Idaho, where it's still, more of a conservative type of place, but yet there are still people out there that don't want to see the church, thrive, right? And the other side of it is for people that, and again, which is probably another conversation, but which is why churches have to have liability insurance, all of that, because some people can see dollar signs when they look at the church, right? As far as, that they can come in and like take advantage of the church. And unfortunately, right, we continue to read articles and hear about churches that get sued all the time, and so again, part of it is having a structure, whether it's a staff structure or a board structure, is to have that set up, that accountability and checks and balances, so that it's not just lying on one person, right? So that so that there's not just like a blank check for somebody who's too happy to come in and just take all the assets of the church. So again, I think just to say that is that the structure is important, right? And so with that, whichever structure you're in, it's just important to know what structure you have, right? And what the pluses and minuses of those structures are. So like you said you are in Fairview is more of a board-driven church. I'll tell you, and I've described where Oregon Trail is more of a staff-run structure currently. And so basically what that means, right, is that at least this is what I think it means. I guess you can tell me if you think it means something different, but that in a staff-run model, that all of the day-to-day decisions, right, kind of the day-to-day business of the church, most of the decisions of vision, direction, whether we close down during a pandemic or not, kind of all those kinds of things all land on the staff to make. And again, that's where I'm at. Again, for the decision, whether we shut down or went online or opened the doors again, that was all on me, right? And on our staff to make that decision. That was not a board decision. Where in a board structure, right, is those types of big picture decisions and even some of the day-to-day stuff, like, has to go to the board. And that board, or that elder board, or whatever you call it, board of trustees, we have a board of trustees, even though we're a staff run church. Because of those checks and balances, we do also have a board of trustees. And so, but again, but their authority is more limited compared to the staff, where in a board run church, they carry most of the authority.
Yeah. And I'd say our board has been very good with allowing me to kind of help. We talk about rejuvenating and doing some of those things now. Some of those have been handicapped, as we've talked about, with being in a pandemic, of how we would want to, kind of have a new opportunity to go into things and encourage others. But we just want to make sure that, that we're doing those, and they help. I think for us, those decisions are made for me to make, but at the same time, as I'm going through this as a first-time lead, like for bylaws, like even we're supposed to meet quarterly, but I asked to meet monthly still, because I was hoping during this time that this would help create a bridge, that they would see how I work under stressful maybe circumstances, maybe less than ideal as a pandemic may be. And so, really that they can see that. And so although we've only been here now, getting close to 2 years, that in that time, because of the processing and because instead of meeting quarterly, they've probably gotten, closer to like 5 years worth. So they know my heart. They know how I would operate in less than ideal circumstances. So that gives you a little bit more latitude. And so I think part of what you're going through, and like you said, different than, some circumstances, but I think having an understanding of prior leadership. Now, this isn't one of those things of like, you talked about this with, with DB and some of those things, not from a negative standpoint to air the dirty laundry, but understand how did this work and what was the pre-existing kind of status quo? Because I think that kind of helps or gives you an opportunity kind of where maybe you could pivot a bit. And so what you don't want, I can say this because I've been a part of a couple different pastoral searches. And you don't want, like, sometimes we're churches, we're families, we have woundedness. You don't want it to be a power grab for those that are maybe on the search committee or in the place of authority, because oftentimes they're coming from a woundedness. And so they're like, our last pastor didn't do this, so we want to make sure this pastor does this. And so, again, making sure and understanding the why. That's a lot of what we're doing here, is just the why. And I think that is super helpful. Another place where having elders, or even if you didn't have elders in that structure, but having a group that you trust as a pastor that can come alongside of you. If you're a visionary pastor, you need people around you to help, because sometimes you can see A and Z, but you don't know all the other letters that kind of go in there to bring it into focus. And oftentimes, if you're at, like you said, a smaller church, you need those lay people to help launch that, because if it lives and breathes only on what the pastor can do, it will be limited in nature. There will be a ceiling on it, and it won't be able to flourish if someone else doesn't have leadership in it or a passion for it. Even if they just take it on because you took it on and said, oh yeah, I'll do it, pastor, and they don't understand the vision, or you're not speaking into that person in that capacity, that's also going to be a spot where it can get sticky wickets a little bit there for you. So again, those are just some of the things I think we fall more in line with, with COVID and some of those things, kind of like you just described, Ryan, that I was allowed to make those decisions. And I don't make those alone, even though that falls to me. I still solicit help from those that I trust, some of those being on the elder board, some of those that are, in this instance, we have like a lady that worked as a nurse, and she worked for the school districts. So us having a child center, she was one of the people that we could ask, like, hey, what have you done historically as a nurse? What would you do in a school setting? If we're going to keep the child center open, kind of understanding and not just justification. And we're good at that because sometimes we do that for sin's sake, but like to have a purpose, again, the why we are doing this. Because I think, again, in a pandemic, you can see anyone that's going to be, well, why are you doing this? We're a vaxxer. We're not a vaxxer. We're all these different things. And so you can't make it all right. But I think if you can at least explain that, not everyone's going to get on board, not everyone's going to love it. But if I've always found that in those processes or with elders and you're vetting that process, if you process through that with some intentionality and with other people speaking into that, and you have a why, it just didn't come out of, thin air, and you didn't just say, well, this is what we're going to do because, like you said, whether that you process that with your youth pastor, your worship leader, any of those kinds of things, that gives some validity to it. And it wasn't whimsical. I mean, I guess as leaders, as we're going through this, we never want to just throw something out there just to be like, oh yeah, I think that was a really good idea, and not go through it. At least I know we've all done it, but like that there's just points where, you run it through. Often cases, I know in our instance, our wives can be a great sounding board. That might not be a good idea, or that's a great idea. Or maybe they come up with a really great idea that we take credit for. I would never do that. But those kinds of things, as you're working through, as you're processing these things, how do you utilize your board, whether they are the one that's leading the ship or you're inviting them into a conversation to have some say? That's also going to have some buy-in, like I said, for, helping lay people, those kinds of things, because you can have more ambassadors. It's kind of like this thing that we do called discipleship, I think. So, yeah.
No. And like you said, I think it does all kind of meld together. And I think that is to say, even though we are in a staff run model at Oregon Trail, like I still take things to the board, and a lot of times we have these discussions. I'm like, okay, I'm just coming because I want to know where you guys are at. Right. Like not, we don't need a motion or a vote necessarily. But I want to hear from you, right? Like, hey, this is what I'm considering, or these are some options in front of us. Like how would you advise? And again, because those board members, at least again, in our structure, like they are the ones that set the budget. They are the ones that oversee policy, right? Like we do have a motion, a vote, right, to set policies and those kind of things. But again, they are giving, basically through those, especially those two main avenues, they are showing me like what the sandbox I have to play in, right? They're like, again, you are in charge of everything inside these boundaries, right? And like, so again, beyond that, like this is your responsibility, your decision to make. You have the authority to say yes or no. But like I said, a lot of times I do come to them, even on those decisions that are on my shoulders to make. I still want to hear from them because, again, our board is elected from our congregation. And so everybody who's on our board of trustees, they're elected by the congregation. They represent the congregation, like I said, to fulfill those responsibilities. And that's been one of the things that I've consciously tried to do, because I am on the nominating committee for our board. And so I do have a lot of influence into who gets on the board. And that's one of the things for me is to make sure that our board like adequately represents our congregation. And so I want to have some diversity on our board. And so for us, like, again, a mix of men and women, a mix of different ages, a mix of different phases of life, right? We have some retirees on our board, and we have some that have young kids, right? And we have ones that have kids in college. There are, again, it's a mix of men and women that's on our board. And that's one of the things that I purposely try to do to make sure that our board does adequately represent, the our current congregation. And let's say through the years, that's been kind of hard to do, because especially when we started Oregon Trail, and I've said, that the congregation was typically older, right? I mean, it was our older demographic, and our board represented. So, I mean, they were all people that, could have been my parents or older that were on our board when I started. And, but our church has grown a lot with younger families. And so over the years, as they fulfilled their terms, we brought new people on, all those kinds of things. We've purposely gotten our board to be younger, just because we want it to best represent our congregation. So now, again, with that said, because it is, like I said, the board does my evaluation. In fact, this December board meeting will be my evaluation meeting. So, again, I'll go to do that. Now, again, I manage all the staff. I carry all of that. I do their evaluations. I bring to that. The only authority that the board has over the rest of the staff is whether we pay them or not. Right. So, because again, they manage the budget, right, and the finances. And so now, again, if they are going to raise or not, whether we give them a raise or we let them go, that's ultimately based on me. And so they're going to set the budget based on my recommendations of hey, we're underpaying this position, or they need more time. We need to raise them. So again, I will bring that to the board, but then it's that they have the authority to ultimately to approve it or not approve it, right, based on the finances. So, but again, that's not a decision. If I bring that to them, that's not something that's gonna, when it's time to vote on it, but that's not gonna be the first time they hear it, right? Because that's one of the things I always try to bring things to the board. And like I said, even things that they don't have the authority or I need a motion for, I still want to hear their opinions on. And I think, just like you said, I mean, scripture tells us, right, that with much counsel comes wise decisions. And I think that's so very true. Again, no matter what your structure is. And but again, I think it is highly important that what decisions you have the authority to make as the pastor, or as a lay leader, or a ministry leader, or even a volunteer, right? Again, okay, what kind of plastic bags we put in the garbage cans? Is that a decision that you can make, right, as a volunteer, or is it one that has to go up? And again, it seems like that's just very trivial, but the reality, though, is that so many times, right, it's the water's so muddy in the church about who makes what decisions, and it all comes down not just to structure, but you just need to know that, right? And then just so you don't end up stepping on your own feet, right, or offending people when you shouldn't be, or making decisions that were theirs to make, and then steamroll people. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think some of the things, as you were talking, that I was thinking about and again, if you have more questions about this, you could reach out to us and we could dive deeper into these things. Again, we have a limited amount of time you can't unpack everyone's bylaws. At least you can't ours in about a 40-minute podcast. That just doesn't happen. But there are different things. And a couple that I wanted to run through is selection of the board. And so how do you guys process that? How do you go through the selection of that? You talked about being on a recommendation kind of committee that helps bring some names to ratify. We have that here as well. And I serve on the search committee, is what ours is called. But I can't chair that because, again, there's a checks and balance there of that. They are bringing forth, and hopefully this is the case in every circumstance when we're bringing leadership in, that there is a process for Christ followers, that these people have exhibited leadership and good people in their faith walk, as well as just their willingness to give and to serve, of their time and other things. So I think that's important, is the selection of that, because I think it's really important, especially as a pastor. You got to remember, like you said, oftentimes, most of the time, if not all of the time, these elders are not obviously paid staff. They're volunteers. They're people that have given up their time And sometimes, like you said, even in your structure, are asked to make big financial decisions, and they don't get a chance to know everything that oftentimes we get. So that puts a lot of pressure on the pastor to adequately give the scenario. That's probably why you just said you run it by them a couple of different ways so they can process it, that they can hear it, that they can kind of be praying about it before that decision has to be made, right there on the floor, so to speak. And so I think bringing those things to light, I have a couple more, but let's just start there with kind of the selection for ours. Right now we're on like every 2 years, or every year we rotate on it like a new two, and they serve a 4-year period. And so they serve a 4-year period. They can serve back-to-back 4-year periods, so they can do 8 before they need to step down. And every year there's 2 that are coming due to kind of rotate off. So that is one. We have currently 10. Our bylaws call from anywhere from 9 to 11. We have 10, which is kind of a hard number because you could find yourself in a tie at 5-5, and heaven forbid that we would. But I get a vote in that, and then the 9 voting members. We now have 7. We call them resident elders, and then we have 2 non-resident elders, and our bylaws call for them to be credentialed through Church of God. So we have 2 non-resident elders, and that is a huge help to us because sometimes, again, not only are they serving God in a different capacity, sometimes they have different resources. Maybe like for one of mine, it was one of our past senior pastors for here, and he was the intern before I got here. So he's been very connected. I think he jokes about being at the church like 6 times. So he was here as a young kid, his parents moved to take over farming in Wisconsin, then they came back, and then he was the lead pastor before we got the site where we're currently at. And then he's been back as an intern and stuff. So he talks about how he's been back. So he speaks to the historical view. Why did it come to be this way? What was the thought pattern? Historically, this is who we are. This is part of our DNA, even if that's changing. And then our second non-resident elder is through Church of God ministry. He's on the executive team. And so that helps us stay connected there, but also through global context and some of those things. And it just has a different feel because sometimes we think of, oh, we've always done it this way or this is how we do it. But sometimes just having an outsider come in and say, oh, well, I've been involved with other churches and they do this way. And it's like, great, we don't have to recreate the wheel. And so again, how do you guys select them? Kind of what is that makeup of your elders, and kind of what is their terms?
Yeah. So again, as you use the term elder, and that is kind of a biblical term. Like if you look in Timothy, and some other Jude, some of those New Testament descriptions of what church leadership is. And again, they use, that's the term, but again, we don't have elders. We call ours board of trustees. So we just have one board. Like I said, if you, there's a lot of churches that use that exact structure described in Timothy with elders and deacons. And again, that's a whole nother probably conversation, like I said, and what deacons do and all of that. But so again, so our board of trustees functions basically as elders and deacons. And so they kind of fulfill that. Although I guess you could probably argue that our staff are actually probably the deacons, but anyways, that's like I said, a different conversation probably. But so ours are board of trustees members. So we have, per our bylaws, and ours are a little different than yours. We have 7 board members and 2 alternates. So if we have, again, a full board is 9 people. But 7 of those are board seats, and we have 2 alternates. So our board seats ours are 3-year terms, and they can all, just like yours, serve 2 back-to-back terms before they have to go off the board, and then they have to be off the board for at least a year before they can reapply. And so, and ours are also staggered, just like yours, which is wise, right? So that you don't end up with the whole board potentially going off at the same time. And then you have to bring on all new people who have no idea what's going on. So, ideally you just replace a couple every year. So ours, since it's an odd number, ours goes 2, 2, and 3. right? And so this last year, we literally just had 3 that got elected, and then next year will be 2. The year after that will be 2. And so theirs are all staggered in that way as well. And obviously they are kind of staggered too, based on whether it's their first term or their second term, whether they have to go off again or going, doing their second term. So, but anyway, so that's where that, and then our alternate positions are actually 1-year terms. So they are elected every year. And so those alternates are on the board. They go through the same process to get on the board as our board seats, but they are only 1-year terms. So they have to be reelected every year. There is no, like term limit necessarily on them, other than they have to be ratified every year. But they also, it's an alternate seat in that they are on the board. They are part of all the discussions in all the meetings, are included in all the communications. However, they cannot make a motion and they do not vote. And so again, so our vote technically could never be in a tie because we have 7 board members, right? And so if everybody's there, right, then we would never have a tie. Although the way that goes, again, is basically our board chairman doesn't vote unless there's a tie. So again, our board chairman would be breaking the tie, right? He's the 7th vote. And so, which is currently it doesn't have to be a man. It could be a woman, but currently it's a man. And then, so I, again, per our bylaws, I have to be present in all board proceedings. But I am not on the board and I do not vote. And so that is different, right, than yours. So like I said, but, and again, that is that kind of checks and balances, right? Of like where the board, has authority over me, right? As a senior pastor. So again, it's kind of a conflict of interest for me to vote on my own hiring or firing, right? Or whatever. So that's the way our structure is. So I, again, have to be present in all board meetings, and per our bylaws, but I do not have a vote and I cannot make a motion. And again, that's just the separation of power, basically, right? As far as I have the power to make a lot of the day-to-day decisions and staffing and kind of all those vision, spiritual leadership for the church, all those kinds of things. But then the board, like I said, has their primarily policy and budget decisions. So that's where we're at. No, so nominating team. So I am, like I said, it's me, our board chairman, our church treasurer, and then up to 2 other people that can be on that nominating committee. So it's a minimum of 3. So it has to be board chairman, senior pastor, and church treasurer. And again, a part of our vetting process, like they apply to be, we have a packet we put out with kind of the requirements of the board, the expectations of the board, the terms, explaining all those kinds of things. There's a questionnaire they fill out, and then we have a interview. They come in with that team and they interview through that, and then we seek the Lord on whether the committee approves them or not. Part of that vetting process, or part of the expectations that's in that packet, is that our board members are contributing members to the church. So that's why our church treasurer is on that team, is because they're one of the only 2 people that know who gives and how much and how often. Right. Because again, I don't know that, and none of our board members know that. I mean, none of our staff know that. I mean, we see the general numbers, right? Like I know what the offering is every Sunday, and I know where our budget is, and all of our expenses. Like that's part of my responsibility, is to control or keep watch of that, and to make sure that the staff don't overspend or whatever. Right. And so, I mean, that is a part of my role, and all that is reported to the board. And so I see those same numbers. So I see the general numbers, but I don't see individual giving records. And so only our treasurer does that. So again, if somebody comes, a name is brought up as a potential board member, right? Like, I mean, I don't know whether they are regular contributors or not, right? And again, it says in there that they're supposed to be tithers. Now, again, we don't know what anybody makes, and that's none of our business. And so we will never know if they're actually biblically tithing, right? Giving 10% of their increase. And again, even our treasurer won't know that. Obviously, and again, currently it's a woman, doesn't have to be a woman, but I mean, she can obviously tell if you're throwing $50 a month, obviously you're not biblically tithing, right? I mean, you're living on more than $500 a month, we would expect, right? So again, but even with that said, we don't really know, right? But that's why she's on that team. And so that's really one of the only ways I would ever know whether somebody is a tither or not, is if their name gets crossed off of the nomination list by the treasurer. It's not hard to figure out why, right? So, but again, that's kind of the break. And then once the nominating committee job is to present, right, the people for those positions, and then they are ratified by the congregation. And so the congregation votes at our annual meeting every year. They vote on those members, and so, but they just vote to approve or not approve. So it's again, we just present one name for each position. It's not like a, where, oh, there's three people for this one seat and they like campaign for, like, it's not that way, and it's purposely set up so it's not that way, right? So that so again, if there's two open seats, then the nominating committee will present two names, right? And then they're either approved or not approved by the congregation.
Yeah. And sometimes there's little nuances of, do you guys have like an executive team that is a branch of your board of trustees? That's how it was when we were, like, say, at Vancouver. They could go into executive council. So meaning anyone could come to an elder or board of trustee meeting. But when it went into executive council, or those that were there, those ones were a little bit more private by nature. They dealt with some of those more specific things, like in your instance, it would be like the wage of the senior pastor and some of those things, because some of those things they keep kind of more close knit. That's not everybody's thing, as far as like, oh, the pastor makes exactly this amount and the youth pastor makes this amount. So there's some, again, checks and balances, not like a veil, but again, those things can be very divisive. I think, like, I've seen that in the past, like, for, oh, well, this youth pastor should do a lot more then, and they should make a lot more. We talked about, again, previous show about, if they're not able to do the sole purpose that they have at that level, then they will be a part-time person. So we had kind of that. Here we have kind of that same thing, maybe in a finance committee. So again, our treasurer is a guy, and it kind of holds those things together. But we meet and we discuss some of those things, whether that is maintenance or some of those things as well, that are going to be check written things. So we have that. Do you have anything along those lines, an executive kind of council? Or
so yeah, I mean, our board of trustees is our executive council. So okay. But same thing as far as, like, I mean, our meetings are open. I mean, anybody can come to them. But if we are speaking to personnel issues or private type of stuff, then yes, I mean, we can go into executive session. And that is where, again, like, anybody who's not on the board, officially, is not in privy to that conversation. And like I said, with that too, even like when we present the budget to the congregation every year, all of the salary numbers are not included. Like, I mean, again, there's a whole section of payroll, in our budget, and like they see the total number, right, of what we're spending on payroll, but they don't see it. It's not broken down into the different positions. So even my salary, all of the staff salaries are not, quote unquote, public knowledge. And like I said, again, that was one of the things that I changed when I came, because they were literally presenting everything. And like you said, it was kind of divisive, right? Of like, of everything, of every employee's salary being out there for everybody to see. And like you said, there's always these different comments. Oh man, maybe I should have been a pastor. I never made that much money. There's just all these kind of different comments and, stuff. And like I said, it's just not healthy. And I think the reality, there's no other business that posts all of their employees' salaries for everybody to see. Like you just don't do that. And so we didn't do it either anymore. Right. And like I said, there were a few people that kind of questioned it. And when we first started doing that, but
again, part of that is the checks and balance that you kind of have there are those people making those financial decisions, or ones that are giving, like that's part of the process for you. It's a very slippery slope to have people that are directing or helping speak into where God's money is going, if they're not themselves also giving in that same capacity. And so I think those are some things that are there. I mean, I've served on staffs where if you're not tithing they do know what you make there as a being on staff. If you don't tithe, then that's a fireable offense. Like, that's how serious they take it. Depends on the leadership, of course, because I've also been on leadership to where that is an expectation, but there's always an exception, apparently. But, there's some of those things that it can take a lot of different forms, is what I'm trying to say. And so just understanding where that is, what is your threshold? Where do you guys feel called? Where's the Lord directing you? I mean, it can be totally different. Again, as these times have changed, even in Seattle, I can't imagine it can continue to get more, but it can. And I can speak to Boise as kind of one of those spots, now that it's, in publications, it's one of those things that is, one of the most it's not affordable to live in anymore, for the local person. And so the growth has happened at such a rate that, yeah, the house may still cost half of what it would here in Seattle, but the income isn't the same commensurate to that for them to afford that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think, again, when you're talking of leadership, when you're talking of having some of these conversations, these are things that, you got to have the conversation, because, like, if I would have been hired in Boise, I think our house, like, from when we got there to now, I think it like tripled almost in price. So again, is that one of those things where do you triple the pastor salary to keep up with that? Yeah, I don't know that all aligns, but you got to be in communication. You got to have those things. And again, there's resources out there. Obviously, we're not like the leading authority on this part of it, but Church of God has some things, even through retirement for servant solutions. You've been a part of some of those groups for like the care initiative and some of those things to make sure that the pastor's healthy as well. And that's kind of part of the role of the board, is to help make sure that we're healthy, not just in a financial sense. Like my big thing on my list, I have my review coming up, is to develop a self-care plan for myself, so that I don't run myself into the ground. So in fact, we're seeking some outside counsel and stuff for me to look at resources from other people so that I don't recreate the wheel, but also doing some testing. And so that's kind of working through that with the chairman of our board and some of those that are on my review team. So yeah, it's important to have people that are vested, that care, that are willing to do that. So anyhow, yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah. And, I think, like I said, as we just kind of wrap this up, I think to say is like, when it comes to our governing structure, whatever the model is, if it's staff driven, if it's board driven, elder driven, elder deacon board, or even if you're just doing it by yourself, right? I think the important thing is to build in these structures, right? And these checks and balances, because any of these structures can work and work well. But make sure that they are even tested a little bit. And just like we said before, even a horrible structure works when everything's great. But I think probably one of the best things that have come out of the pandemic is every structure has been tested, right? Because on who makes what decisions, and like I said, it just with the pandemic, because there's been decisions that have been made that we didn't ever think we were going to have to make. And again, whether those are financial decisions, how are we going to hold services? Are we going to require masks or not? Right? Like, I mean, all those kind of things are decisions that all have to be made. And yet these different structures, like the process of arriving at that decision is different. And so, again, I think just as we said, no matter what structure you're in, make sure the one that you have a structure, make sure that there are checks and balances in that structure, so that, again, all the weight is not on your shoulders, right, as a single leader, and also so that it's also defendable, right? Whether it's especially for financial things, or even any of these other decisions that, again, that you can't just be taken out, right, or fired for, a wrong decision or something like that as well. And so, again, it's just really important to have that. And so just know your structure, right? Build one if you don't have it, and seek counsel. And like you said, whether it's outside counsel, they said that's one of the pieces that you have in yours that we don't have at Oregon Trail, is you have some outside influences are built into your board. Now, again, that's something that I've sought, like you said, like I've sought that community in Church of God and in with other pastors in our area. Again, I have people I can call that are in Church of God or outside of Church of God or in other denominations that I can ask questions to, like, man, how do you guys deal with this? And, again, and every denomination has its kind of different structures built up, but I think we see the importance of that, right? And through that. Now, again, what's kind of opened up, and that's typically what we do, right, is we're like, oh man, that's a good idea. We need to dive deeper into that. And I think probably next episode, just as you talked about, is a self-care routine, right? Like kind of how are we evaluated, like sabbatical. I mean, that's all kind of into that realm. And I think that would be a great thing for us to talk about as well. That is connected to our board and our structures, but yet it is kind of a separate thing as well. So, we can definitely jump down that rabbit hole next time. But hey, it's been a quick time, right? Because our time is already gone. And I think with that said, though, again, church structures, it seems really boring, right? And it's just kind of like, it's something that you can easily avoid or just throw off. But again, if you hear anything from this episode, just know that it is important, and you need to know what it is, and so that you can function with it, and it can do what it's supposed to do, which is help you, protect you and your church and all of God's money and God's time and God's mission, right, of the church that we're supposed to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, in some instances, it's a insurance policy to make sure. In some instances, you're the youth guy, but I was the Bible teacher and stuff at a high school. It's kind of like, another way to think of it is, if you wait to make the decision when you need to, oftentimes it's going to be too late. And we say this to young men and stuff, like, if you don't have boundaries with your girlfriend of how far you guys are willing to go in the heat of the moment, you're not going to establish that. And so, like, taking that out of the youth group now and putting it back into our context. Yeah, this is stewardship, man. If you don't have some of these things in play, and we're still learning and we're still getting some of these in practice for ourselves, but like, try to process what you can so that you are ready when it comes. And man, if you need time, and like you said, we'll maybe dive into this next episode, go and seek God and try to just get away, hear God in the still small voice, sometimes outside of all the chaos that's taking place that we opened up this episode with. So yeah, thanks again. Really appreciate you guys, being a part of this journey with us. And if you have any more questions, let us know in the various channels, and we would love to try to help in any way, or man, even just to pray with you, or an encouragement even for us. So, hey, thank you guys. God bless you. Glad that you joined us today.
Acts 20:28. So guard yourselves and God's people. Feed and shepherd God's flock, his church, purchased with his own blood, over which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as leaders. The Acts 2028 podcast is a broadcast production of In His Grip Publishing. Our theme music is Achievement by Giovanni Bruno. We'd love to hear from you on our social media accounts or through email. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at Acts 2028 Podcast, or send us an email at acts2028podcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave us ratings and reviews, and even give us your email so you can be notified of new episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, we hope that you will lead wherever God has put you, and together we can all live out Acts 2028 as we serve in the established church.